Join us now on Flickr at flickr.com/groups/art of photography. Welcome to the Art of Photography. I'm Ted Forbes, and today we're going to talk about exposure. Now, exposure, what is it? Well, when you're shooting pictures on your camera, exposure is going to be the optimal settings, the optimal combination of settings on your camera that project the correct amount of light onto whatever your recording device is. In a digital camera, it's going to be the sensor. In a film camera, it's going to be your film. And so, you know, why do I need to know this? Well, if you're kind of new to photography in this day and age, certainly, these are things you never have to think about because most modern digital cameras or even film cameras have meters that are advanced enough to put all these settings into the camera, so you really never have to think about it. The cameras are smart enough to know what you're trying to shoot and what really is the optimal exposure setting to get that. Now, it is a computer, it's not a human inside a meter, and it's not always right, and it's not always the desired effect you want to get. So how do you determine exposure? What are you looking for in a good exposure, and how do you control those kinds of things? Maybe sometimes you want something to be underexposed for effect, or you want it to be overexposed for effect. So we're going to look at those things today, and I think best illustration is if we look at some pictures. Okay, we're looking at a black and white photograph here, and the reason I've chosen a black and white photo for our purposes here is we're talking about exposure, and so I want to get all the color information out of here, and let's just talk about shades of light or luminance here. And Ansel Adams, if you're not familiar with him, was a famous photographer who produced a lot of work in the 50s who really came up with a system that grasped control of exposure, and his system was called the zone system, and it referred mainly to how you were going to get a print out of a negative, but it also applies to just general exposure here in our more modern digital cameras. But anyway, this is just a general overview of zone system principle here. But Ansel would divide a grayscale photograph into what referred to as zones of light. So at the low end, at zone 1, you have pure black, and at zone 10, you have pure white. And so you can see in this photograph, which is balanced, that you have in the really dark shadow areas here, go to pure black almost, and then some of the highlights on these leaves jump to pure white. So we have black and white, and then all the shades of gray in between. And you can see I've created a grayscale down here. And in the zone system, each one of these is referred to as a zone. So zone 1 is black, and zone 10 is white. Zone 5 is it's referred to often as middle gray. And more or less what you're going to try and do is have a balance of these tones in your exposure. Now, if you have more contrast in your image, you may actually have fewer zones and a wider leap between them. But when you have 10 zones here, each one of these zones is one stop apart, is what this is referred to, this measurement. So one stop of light apart. So if this image is a stop too dark, it won't be quite balanced. If it's a stop or two too bright, it won't be balanced either. Now you can use that to kind of a creative effect, and we'll get into that later. That's more of an advanced concept. But let's just talk about a basic exposure. So if I have a well-exposed image here, which is 10 stops, I'm going to show you what happens here. As this image is overexposed. Now, if I let too much light into the camera and I start to overexpose this image, you can see right away, first of all, look at the grayscale. This is way overexposed now. All the highlights start to blow out, and this is a pretty severe case here. And I'm exaggerating for illustrative purposes, but you can see that our black is not black at all. It's a middle gray, and we really only have 2 or 3 stops of light here. So anyway, so back off the exposure. If I underexpose an image here, it becomes too dark. And not only does it become too dark, but you can see that all my shadows start to clip together, and I lose all my highlights. And again, you can use this to creative effect, but right now we're talking about just getting a median exposure. You can see too, if I just start to go up slightly off of our exposure here, you can see that the whites clip out really quick. And the main concern is you start to lose detail here in your highlights. And to achieve a good exposure, you really want to have a balance between detail and shades of light. Now, obviously, this does apply to color as well, but I've simply removed that from the equation here so you can see just in terms of a grayscale what the light is doing if you're overexposed or underexposed. Okay, so how can you control exposure? We're going to look at that in the next couple podcast episodes, but I just want to give you a general view of what you're looking for in a good exposure here. So this is The Art of Photography, and thanks for watching.